Okay, I'd like to, as advertised, I'd like to talk about the Halachos of Milchama, to sort of understand what it means for Al Pi Halacha, what it means for Eretz Yisrael to be in a Milchama, and what are the laws of those Milchama. This is, of course, should be a schus for those that are fighting in battle and those that are afraid and those that are putting their life in danger, and the schus for all of us. First of all, I just want to say this. It's something interesting that, cover a few things and try to get some clarity. It's something interesting that we have a lot of material about a lot of halachas. Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, we have a lot of svarim, very little literature, halachic literature about Milchama, Halachos Milchama. And the reason is, very simply, that for the last couple of thousand years, there hasn't been any Milchama until the Kiyum HaMedina in 1948, and the real Milchamas took place in the time of the Hashmonaim. So the time of the Hashmonaim, that was 200 years before the Chorban Beis HaMikdash. And that's when we had a lot of wars. Josephus wrote a book about it called The Wars of the Jews. And that was a period of Milchama from Tanakh till the time of Hashmonaim. And there, by the way, Josephus reports we had huge casualties, lo aleinu, 1,000 people a day. Josephus talks about huge casualties that took place in those wars. After the Chorban Beis HaMikdash, during the Hadrian decrees, so Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kokhba waged a war with the Hadrian, or a sort of a rebellion. I'm not sure exactly it was a Milchama or not a Milchama, but there was a Bar Kokhba, and Rabbi Akiva's explanation of that war was, okay, this is Mashiach. This is Mashiach, Bar Kokhba. He seems to have been wrong on that call, but that was a sort of not a kibush Eretz Yisrael, but that was a milchama, a messianic milchama, and that didn't work out. And fast forward from the time of Rabbi Akiva, which was 50 years after the Chorban Beis HaMikdash, let's say, until today, till 1948, the War of Independence. So we don't have wars, so there's no Shilos and Shuvas, there's no Reb Chaim Oizer, there's no Reb Yitzchak Elchanan, there's not much from the Chavetz Chaim, there's no Mishnah Berurah and Hilchos Milchama. This had to be developed, something like Trumas and Meisers and Shemitah, also had to be developed since, and that's why it's a lot, Shemitah, even from the last time there was Shemitah, this time was a lot less confusing, because there's so much more literature and big Talmidei Chacham that have been thinking about it. But Milchama also, not so much in the sort of like mainstream poskim. Like we don't have a lot of Rav Yashiv and Rav Shlomo Zalman, a little bit about Hilchos Milchama, a lot from the more what should we call them? from the more what? Yeah, I try not to say Dati Lumi. From the people that go to the army more. So that was not about Israeli wars. That was about soldiers going to fight the Nazis. Yeah, the pre-Nazis and the Russians and those laws don't apply here. And this is what I'll explain to you. So let me say a couple of things. Hakdama. First of all, everybody says, and I've seen it in Sfarim, Murgala B'Pumadama, that there's a machlokes, the Rambam and the Ramban, whether there's a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael B'Zman Hazeh. And the Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Megillah Esther writes about this before. Others quote him and say that according to the Rambam, there's no mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael B'Zman Hazeh. That's for when Mashiach comes. And according to the Ramban, there is a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. That's what everybody says. It's I'm sorry to use a strong language, but it's almost ridiculous to say that in the Rambam. I pointed this out before. I'll just read you a little bit of the Rambam in Perek Hey, Halacha Tes, Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Hilchos Malachim, Perek Hey, Aser Lotzeis Me'eretz Yisrael L'chutz La'aretz. You're talking Halacha L'maisa. Aser Lotzeis Eretz Yisrael L'chutz La'aretz La'olam. You're not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael, says the Rambam. except for the three reasons, as the Gemara says, Lil Matara, Lisa Isha, Ilahatzel Miyad Goyim, V'yachzor La'aretz, you're running for your life, but Stam, you're not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael. Why not? Because it's a mitzvah, obviously. V'chein Yotze Hu L'schara, sometimes for business. Aval Lishkain B'chutz La'aretz, but to live in Chutz La'aretz, as the Rambam himself did, Aser. That's usually Aser, and he gives some financial conditions to when it's mutter. In other words, when there's no economy here at all, the Rambam says, he calls it Shnei Sloyim Be'echad Shava. I'm sorry, Achasa Shava Dinner Chitim B'Shnei Dinarim. Like some kind of an economic status where the economists say it's impossible to live here. But other than that, of course, you have to live in Eretz Yisrael. Says the Rambam, Gedolei HaChachamim Hayu Menashkin Al Tchumei Eretz Yisrael. The big Chachamim, he's talking about even, not in the Gemara, the Balei Tosfos, they would come into and kiss the ground when they came into Eretz Yisrael. Menashkin Avoneo, Misgalgal and Al Afara. V'chein hu oimer ki ratzu avodechas Avoneo. Amr Chachamim, the Chacham say, Kol HaShoichen Be'eretz Yisrael Avonoisav Mechulin. Living in Eretz Yisrael is Mechilas Avonos. Shnamar brings psukim for this. Vafilu halach ba'arba amos, even to go 4 amos in Eretz Yisrael, zachal l'chaya elam haba. Chol ha'kaver ba nischaper lai, if you get to be buried here, nischaper lai, kilo ha'makim shu b'poi mizbeach kapara. I'm just skipping a little bit, but it's absolutely clear. Afal pikein, even though it's much better to live here than to die here, says the Rambam, afal pikein, Gedolei Chacham Hayu Melichanas Meiseyan L'Sham. They used to bring their mesim to Eretz Yisrael. I don't know what's right or what's not right. Maybe Nisan, but like if you go up to on top of Har Beria, you find the kever of Abaya and Rava. They never lived in Eretz Yisrael. So if those that are kvarim, obviously you see there was an Indian to be buried in Eretz Yisrael and to climb the highest mountain outside of Mount Hermon. One of the highest mountains, to schlep him up to the top of the mountain and bury him there. So say Laman me Yaakov Avinu v'Yosef HaTzadik. We see that it was important to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. And then the Rambam ends off by saying, Lo'olam Yadar Adam be'Eretz Yisrael afilu be'ir sheruba goyim. It's better to live in Israel in a place which is mostly goyim. Val Yadar b'chutz la'aretz afilu be'ir sheruba Yisrael. So Ramallah is better than Borough Park. Gaza's, I don't know. The boundaries is the next year. I don't know if Gaza, but I think clearly, Lebanon is Eretz Yisrael biblically. Am I right?
Syria.
No. So we'll talk about it. Shekol hayoytze l'chutz haaretz kilu oived avodah zara. This is the Rambam. Shenamar ki gershuni hayoim. Leich avoid Elohim acherim, the Navi said. It's like as if you're going to worship other gods. Anyways, it's pretty clear that the Rambam was pro-living in Eretz Yisrael. And he's not going to tell us to live in a bad place unless it's a mitzvah. He's not going to tell us it's a mitzvah to go Arba Amos in Eretz Yisrael and you're Zoicha to Olam Haba unless it's a mitzvah. So to me, even though I know it's quoted, I'm just saying what I think. I don't, unless the Rambam, some people say maybe two different periods of his life or something. But the Pashat Pshat and the Yad HaChazaka, which we live by, Pashat Pshat and the Yad is that there's a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. The Ramban comes along and he says there's a part of the Sefer HaMitzvahs. There's the Rambam, the Ramban, and there's a section in the Sefer HaMitzvahs that the Ramban wrote, the Mitzvah Sheshachach Harambam Lazkiroi. It's a nice lesson. He made a list of the things that the Rambam forgot about when he was counting his minyan mitzvahs. They were all into this, into 613. But things that the Rambam forgot about, and one of them is, everybody says, Mitzvahs Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. So you look at the Ramban, and that's not what the Ramban says, and this is where I begin. The Ramban doesn't say that the Rambam didn't count the Mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. It's a very superficial reading. The Ramban says, I gave it out once as a quote, but here's the quote. Mitzvah Sheshach HaChaysan HaRav, Shenitztavenu Loreshes ha'aretz asher nosan hakel yis'ala la'avosenu la'Avraham liYitzchak liYaakov v'loi na'azva biyadzu l'asenu min ha'umais oy l'shmama. There's a mitzvah, says the Ramban, that the Rambam forgot about, which is Loreshes ha'aretz, not Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. That's not what the Ramban says. There's a mitzvah the Ramban says that the Rambam seems to have forgotten about. The Hayrashtem. You have to go and you have to conquer Eretz Yisrael and make us ours. And he even adds to it, Hashem gave us this land. He gave it to Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. V'loi nazva. Don't just leave it biyad zulasenu. It's like leaving Sefer Torah in the hands of Goyim. It's going to be a zilzul Sefer Torah. Same thing says the Ramban. You're not allowed to leave the Eretz Yisrael in the hands of the Goyim. So that's what the Ramban says, that that's his lashon, that the Ramban, again, I found in Bamidbar, Al Daiti, he says, on the mitzvah of Hayrashtem, Zu mitzvahs essay, Yitzavo Eisam, V'yirshu Eisa ki hinusuna lahem, Lo yimasu b'nachlas Hashem. V'ilu yala al daitum leleches v'lichbaish eretz shinoy or eretz ashur v'zelasan l'is yasef sham yavro al mitzvahs Hashem. It's aveir to try to conquer other lands, but there's a mitzvahs essay. Like we don't go to Bavel and say, okay, we're going to make that ours. You don't do that. But that's an aveir. We're Jews. We're not supposed to be conquering lands, except the mitzvah of Hayrashtem, that there's a mitzvah of Yerushas Haaretz, which we have. Says the Ramban. The Rambam seems to have forgotten about it. I doubt if he forgot about it, but it's a nice lashon. But what is true is that the Rambam doesn't bring that mitzvah. So this is not a nuance. This is a yisoida that the Rambam holds mitzad echad, that you have to live in Eretz Yisrael, and you have to walk down Amalek Eretz Yisrael, and you need a heter to leave Eretz Yisrael. That's what the Rambam says clearly. Nevertheless, you shouldn't do the mitzvah of Hayrashtem. That's the machlokes. The machlokes, the Rambam and the Ramban, is whether there's a mitzvah of Hayrashtem as Haaretz, whether there's a mitzvah of Yerushas Haaretz or not. That's the machlokes. And you can't make the machlokes bigger than that or smaller than that. That's the machlokes. The Ramban holds you should come in here and make offensive wars, and just to do whatever you got to do to be Yoresh Eretz Yisrael. And the Rambam says no. And that, by the way, the whole sort of genre, the Vayol Moshe, what are we doing? Layala B'chayma. That's talking about all those that we don't make, according to the Rambam. That's what he says. I looked this morning. You don't make proactive wars in Eretz Yisrael, Adzman HaMashiach, until you have a Melech, until you have a Sanhedrin, until you don't make those proactive wars. Okay, so this is a nice machlokes, which is not really Nogeya L'maisa, because, Tzava Hagana Yisrael, like we're doing defense, and most we're doing counter-offense. I'm not an expert in this, but as everybody knows, that we're just trying to stay alive here. If there would be peace, nobody's going to war. And we're not. I don't think right now we're looking to be kovesh the land, except for security purposes. I don't think we're looking to be kovesh. We would have been kovesh the Golan, except for security purposes. So security is a different story. And this is the machlokes. The Ramban says, by the way, and the Ramban. Everybody says, well, you see the Ramban Lashitasa, he came to move in Eretz Yisrael. The Rambam did move in Eretz Yisrael. So superficial to say that. Was the Ramban more pro Eretz Yisrael than the Rambam? Kasher lagid. I don't know, circumstances. Maybe they didn't let the Rambam out of Egypt because he was working for the, for the government there. But so let me. Everything's possible, but the Rambam talks about lo yetze. Rambam's buried in Eretz Yisrael. Right?
Does Yerashtim also mean to inherit?
How do you inherit something? We're not looking at the Arab will. Yerashtim means Milchama, as Rashi says on the pasuk, and Chazal it's clear pasuk pshat that Yerashtim means to make war. So I want to clarify the following. If we look at Perek Chamishi of Hilchos Melachim, so the Rambam points out that there's two, maybe three kinds of war in Eretz Yisrael. Again, I'm not talking about the Bolsheviks, and I'm not talking about Vietnam. I'm talking about here in Eretz Yisrael. There's two, according to the Kehillat Shivtei Yeshurun, three kinds of war that are possible here in Eretz Yisrael. And maybe let's figure out what we're doing now. Like what's going on now? Is it just? So the Rambam says as follows: Ein hamelech nilcham tchila ela al milchemes mitzvah. Clear Rambam. In order to wage a war, or to have a war, to fight a war, it has to be milchemes mitzvah. Everybody knows there's two kinds of milchamas, two basic kinds of milchamas. There's milchemes mitzvah and milchemes harishos. So says the Rambam, the only kind of war you're allowed to have, Ein hamelech nilcham tchila ela al milchemes mitzvah. We're only doing milchemes mitzvah. By the way, agav, milchemes rishus. What's the translation of that? Huh? Optional war.
Permitted war. It's not defensive.
Means you asked rishus from the Sanhedrin. That's what it means. Milchemes harishus means you asked rishus. Because in a milchemes harishus, which I'll explain in a minute, the milchemes harishus, you have to ask permission from the Sanhedrin. Means, for sure, obviously there has to be a Sanhedrin. And the Melech has to decide. According to the Gemara, there has to be a Navi involved. And you have to ask rishus. So the rishus, the way I understand the Mefarshim in the Mishnah in Soita Memhei, is that the rishus is why I have to ask Sanhedrin rishus. When I ask you a bunch of rabbis whether you should go to war or not, and the answer is that the job of the Sanhedrin is to figure out whether we are whether we'll be zocha, whether we're on the madrega to do milchemes rishus or not, first of all. Second of all, they have to give rishus because that means causing a lot of lives, ours and theirs. But optional, it's optional in the sense that it's not milchemes mitzvah, but the rishus, according to most of the Rishonim, learns that you're asking rishus. You have to ask rishus. So says the Rambam, clearly that these days there's nobody to ask rishus from. We don't have a Sanhedrin. So if we don't have a Sanhedrin, we don't have an Urim V'Tumim, which was also part of it. The Gemara says in Brachos, it asked the Urim V'Tumim. Each one had a different function. The Navi had a function. The Melech, it's easy to say that the Melech, Yisrael, I don't know if it has to be, all the Svarim bring down that it doesn't have to be from Malchus based up, but it means whoever's in charge of the country. He doesn't act on himself in milchemes rishus. He goes and he asks rishus.
When we talk about milchamas, are we talking about specifically in order to conquer land, or are we talking about?
Well, that's exactly my point. Milchemes harishus is to conquer land. Milchemes mitzvah is different. That's what the Rambam is going to say.
Outside of what we already had.
Milchemes harishus is this is what I'm explaining. Milchemes harishus. Again, let's have milchemes harishus, milchemes mitzvah. Let the Rambam speak. We'll let the Rambam say. Ein hamelech nilcham tchila ela milchemes mitzvah. Eizehi milchemes mitzvah. What is a milchemes mitzvah? What is that? Important to know. So the Rambam says 3 cases. 3, not 4, not 2. Milchemes mitzvah zu milchemes shiva amamim. First of all, Torah says clearly, Kanani, Aprizi, Ayavusi, Akirgashi, the 7 Amim that were in Canaan, Hachrem Tachrimem, L'Schaya Kol Neshama, that's a milchemes mitzvah. If there's any of the 7 nations around, whoever they may be, that's a milchemes mitzvah. Milchemes Amalek. Other case is if we're making a milchama with Amalek. Third case is ve'ezras Yisrael mitzar sheba alehem, which is clearly what's going on now. This is a ezras Yisrael mitzar sheba alehem. That's milchemes mitzvah. Because the Rambam v'achakach nilcham b'milchemes harishus. Later on, we can start talking about milchemes harishus. He does talk about it, but we're talking about milchemes mitzvah. It's clear from the from the Rambam that the only milchama, according to the Rambam, could be the Ramban argues with this, but according to, like I said, there's no achronim. There's not a lot of achronim on the subject. But Lefi the Rambam, which when there's not a lot of achronim, we usually go with the Rambam. Lefi the Rambam, we don't do Milchemas Rishus until Mashiach comes. To go and to say that Syria belongs to ours and it belongs to us and we should be, I don't, maybe there are some Rabbanim that say you should do that, maybe, but when it's not for, those that say that you should do such a thing, just make a purely offensive war to gain territory because of the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, so for that you would have to hold the Mashiach is like here. In other words, so those that are holding that we're already living in a Mashiach time, so do the Mashiach thing and conquer land. But I don't know if that's the Kula Alma like Pliga, where certainly the Ikvus of the Mashiach and the Zman Mashiach and the Aschalta de Gula, whatever political name you want to give the period that we live in. But if it was Mashiach, we would be having peace right now. So, Milchemas HaRishus, says the Rambam, to answer your question, Hi ha-milchama shenilcham im shar ha'amim, that we would have with our border, with our neighbors, kedei laharchiv gvul Yisrael ulaharbais b'gdulasai ushma'ai. So we have very clear definition here. Milchemas mitzvah is one of three things: either Zayin Amim, Amalek, or defense. Pikuach nefesh. Those are the three. Milchemas Rishus, laharchiv gvulai, to marchiv gvul Yisrael, laharbis b'gdulasai. David HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech. David HaMelech made wars. This is Ushmai. The Klal Yisrael was David Melech Yisrael, Chai V'Kayim. Milchemas Mitzvah, says the Rambam in Halacha Beis, Einoit Tzarech Lito Ba Rishus Beistin. You don't need any Rishus for that. So therefore it's not called Milchemas HaRishus. Milchemas Mitzvah, you don't need Beistin, you don't need Sanhedrin, you go for it. Ela Yotzei Mei Atzmai B'chol Eis. Whenever it's the right time to do that, do it. It's a mitzvah. V'koife ha'am lotzeis. And your kofe ha'am lotzeis. In the words in the Mishnah, afilu chasen mechupasei, Bekala mechadora, you got to go to war. Milchemas mitzvah. Koifa ha'am lotzeis. Avol milchemas harishus, einu moitzi amba el al pi beistin shel shivim v'echad. For that you need, again, the Rambam says, a Sanhedrin shivim v'echad, yeah.
And the third case, where it's defensive, how do you initiate a defense?
So what do you think?
Someone who's attacked, so how do you initiate on that? I mean, you don't need to get permission, you just initiate that whenever you want. But that's not the case, it sounds like it's not a case you're initiating, it's a case if you're already being attacked.
What are we doing now? We've initiated a war.
So the question is like this.
In other words, if the political or the military experts say that we are in danger, so that means Hatzar Shaba Aleim, Ezra Yisrael Mitzar Shaba Aleim. So B'chol Eis, the Melech could say, okay, we have to go and wage a war.
The question is even before. But here we were attacked first, then we claimed the war.
Right. Right. I know that according to the Geneva Convention, which did not come from Sinai, so you can't wage a war. You can only do a defensive war. So somebody's got to be over that Geneva Convention. But of course, that's an extremely important question for our times. The reason I keep saying that we don't have a lot of precedent for wars from the time of the Hashmonaim is that, we're actually living. I mean, all of us here, sitting here, are actually living in these kind of biblical times. It's a lo pashut. It's okay, a war, no war. This is not Afghanistan. This is biblical in nature, including all the miracles and the Shemiras Hashem. And the Rambam. So what we have according to Rambam, I want to go further in the Rambam, but what we have according to Rambam, just to keep held up here, is that the Rambam does not hold that there's a mitzvah of v'hairashtem. Says the Ramban. There's no mitzvah of v'hairashtem, but v'hairashtem, to inherit the land, would talk about Milchemes Rishus. But Milchemes Chovav, there is a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, and I don't know if that's nogay or not, mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, but there's another mitzvah, Milchemes Mitzvah. I mean, it goes together a little bit, because if nobody's living here, then I guess that would be the nafkamina. But I don't know if there's been a time that nobody's lived here. But if nobody lives here in Eretz Yisrael, so then it's not a case, at least the third case, of Tzar Aleim. There would still be the case of getting rid of the Zayin Amamim, who are considered a contamination to this earth, and certainly to Eretz Yisrael. And there's still a mitzvah mechias Amalek. At the risk of not being politically correct, for years and years I was in the kind of Kiruv world. And in the Kiruv world, when it comes to Parsha Zachar, it's always a big problem to be Makariv people. How do you explain this? And there's all kinds of Amalek. First of all, who's Amalek? We don't know who Amalek is anymore. And second of all, refers to our Yetzer Hara, and everybody has a little bit of Amalek in it. In Chabad Chasidus, the Balatanya writes over and over again that Amalek is the Klipas Chutzpah, and that's the chutzpah that we have to get out of our own system. It's really a lot of apologetics. I mean, I don't know, these days, I'm very proud if we're doing the mitzvah mechias Amalek. It's not something that I find offensive at all. Is it offensive that the Americans bombed the Nazis indiscriminately? These were people that were evil and killers, and I'll talk about Amalek more in a minute. But I think that as a Jew, as Klal Yisrael, our job is to have or and to eradicate evil. I'm not suggesting we walk down the street with a gun and shoot everybody who we think is Amalek. I'm not saying that, but I am saying the concept is a beautiful concept. It's a concept of bringing or to the world, and there is a certain power of evil, which by the way is all within the realm of free choice. And Amalek had to choose to be Amalek. That's part of one of the chukei abriyos, that there's free choice. So that's our mitzvah. I mean, we like the mitzvah, we don't like the mitzvah. I don't know. Somebody asked me last night, and it was a very good question. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving us the mitzvah, because I've said this a couple of times, of eradicating evil and bringing light into the world, why did Hashem also make us Rachmanim b'nei Rachmanim, where it's so hard to do? So.
I absolutely empathize and agree with everything you said. I think the hard part to relate to, and especially to explain to other people, Westerners, is killing the non-armed, non-combatants, women and children, which I have less of a problem with. But I do.
So I'm not, a spokesman for the. I'm not a spokesman for the army, but I mean, what should be clear to all of us is that anybody who's there now is Hamas. In other words, they're finished. I mean, they voted for Hamas. It was actually had a good election there. Like the European Union and the UN were very, very proud of the election. This was a fair election, and they voted in fair and square. Besides for the Ben Sora Murrah part of it, they have decided to ally. Plus, Israel's giving them all this too much, exitability. But okay, I don't want to get into politics. I do really, but it's not it's not the right thing right now. But let's get back to the Rambam. That what we need to understand is that if we're being marchiv gvul, that's a mitzvah that the Rambam does not list, or as the Ramban put it, the Rambam forgot to list this mitzvah of laharchiv gvul. And now we have a new word for that called Milchemes Harishus. Clear in the Rambam. That's called Milchemes Harishus. If anybody's wondering, we don't do Milchemes Harishus. According to the Rambam, we don't do that. Just don't do it anymore. Milchemes Mitzvah, it's a different story. Again, three things: Shiva Amamim, Amalek, or self-defense, or counteroffensive. So those are things that we do. Says the Rambam, Milchemes Mitzvah, when it comes to these three things, ein tzarech lito barishus, based in ela yotzei me'atzei choleis v'koifa amlotzeis, Milchemes harishus, ein moitzei amba ela al pi based in shel shivim ve'echad. Okay, as we said. I just want to point out something to you because, in case it's unclear, in Parshas Shoftim, v'shotrim titan l'chol b'chol sharecha. So towards the end of the parsha is Hilchos Milchama, and it's just very important to read it correctly. The Torah says ki seitzei la milchama alayvecha. V'risasus v'recha v'amrav mimcha lo yisira mehem ki Hashem Elokecha imach hamalcha me'eretz Mitzrayim. So is that Milchemes harishus or is that Milchemes Mitzvah? Chumash.
They're coming for you.
Well, says the Torah, V'haya kikar v'chem el milchama. So as you get close to war, v'nigash hakohen v'diber el am. So first you have that kohen, you had a special kohen gadol that was like Mashuach Milchama, as the Mishnah says in Saita. So the kohen comes and he makes an announcement. V'amar aleim Shema Yisrael. Atem krevim hayoim l'milchama al oivechem al yerach levavchem al tiru v'al tachbazu v'al tartzu mipneihem. By the way, Chazal darshan on this, Omer Aleim Shema Yisrael, Chazal say, Rashi brings it even, that say with everybody, the Kohen should say with everybody Shema Yisrael, because just saying Shema Yisrael will save the people. Just saying Shema Yisrael. I'm going to talk about tzitzis. Shema Yisrael, big thing. Ki Hashem Elokeichem ha'hoylech imachem lilachem lachem imoivechem lo'ishiaschem. The Lord is with you. Kohen steps aside. The Shaitrim, Parsha Shoftim v'Shaitrim, the Shaitrim step up to the stage, the platform where everybody's gathered. V'divru ha'Shaitrim el ha'am leimar, and now they start to the draft. Mi ya'ish asher banavayis chadash v'loy chanochai yelech v'yashiv l'beisai. If listen, okay, the Kohen says we all have to go to war. If you just built a house, go home. Yamus b'milchama v'ish acher yichanchenu. Not because you're worried about somebody else taking over his property, but your head's going to be in your property. Your head's not going to be in the war over here. If you planted a vineyard, go home. If you just got married or you got engaged, go home. You're going to be worrying the whole time somebody else is going to marry my kala. It's a little bit confusing here, and that's why I'm reading this, because if you look at the Mishnah in Saita, which spells this out, so it also says there, and you had certain shotrim in the back of the room that anybody who started walking out, they broke their legs. So it says there, they broke their knee. In other words, like on the other hand, like everybody could say, the last one is, and if you're scared, right? Isha ayore v'rachalevav, mio isha ayore v'rachalevav yelech v'yashev l'beisai lo yimas zavav echav kilavavai. So these are people. So here you have a whole auditorium or Teddy Stadium or whatever it was, full of people. The Kohen gets up. This is a tekes. The Kohen gets up to speak and says, "We're going to war," and then the Shotrim say, "Who goes home?" That's what's going on here in this parsha. All of this, just important to know, is Milchemes Harishus. It's not Milchemes Mitzvah. Milchemes Mitzvah, nobody's going home. Chasen mechupasei, kala mechadora. Nobody's going home. This whole tekes only talked about Milchemes Harishus. How do I know? Because the Chumash says further, a few psukim later. Everything I just told you, Kein taseh l'chol ha'orim ha'rechoikos mimcha ma'od asher loy me'ori ha'goyim ha'elahena. Rak me'ori ha'amim ha'ela asher Hashem Elokecha noisen l'cha nachala loy sechaya kol neshama. Everything I said, says the Torah, is talking about when you're going and you're being marchiv gvul, when it comes to the 7 nations, the parsha, the next parsha of the famous parsha of Yefas Toyar, Kiseitze la Milchama aloivecha. So is that Milchamas Harishus or is that Milchamas Mitzvah? Rashi says Mefurish. Milchamas Harishus Akasav Medaber. Otherwise, there would be no Vashavisa Shivya. Wipe them out. Shabul Milchamas Eretz Yisrael. It's Mefurish Rashi. Shabul Milchamas Eretz Yisrael. Ein loimer Vashavisa Shivya. Apitom Shavisa Shivya. Sharei Kvar Namar Vashiva Amom Umais Loisachaya Kol Neshama. So Rashi is being masader for us, the psukim over here, and saying this whole parsha of Kiseitze LaMilchama is talking about Milchamas Harishus. So we need to know Milchamas. So we're going now with the Shitas HaRambam. Very simple. We're going with the Shitas HaRambam. The Shitas HaRambam is clear that there's Milchamas Mitzvah, Milchamas Harishus. Milchamas Harishus we don't do anyways. We're not doing that nowadays, according to the Rambam. So you can't do it because you don't have a Sanhedrin of Shivim Ve'echad. Even if Mashiach is here, l'chari, you can't do it. The first thing the Mashiach has to do, Mashiach, by the way, to make this clear, as I have many times, what that means is, the way I understand the Mashiach is that we change government styles here, and we go from Memshala to Malucha. All right about that? In other words, right now we have a Memshalah. So that's the method of governing that was chosen by people that were born in Poland and decided this is the right way to make a government over here. I spoke about it a few weeks ago. It's not necessarily the ultimate derech haTorah, but it's what we're used to more in the West, this type of a government. But Mashiach is a melech. Melech HaMashiach, that's a malchus. Kain melech, but we're talking about malchus. So the Svarim, like Poskim, like Rav Kook and others, Rav Herzog, so they held that the government together has got a din of a melech, but the style of leadership is different. So says the Rambam, once the Mashiach comes, then he can appoint a Sanhedrin. The Rambam says this before. Then he can make a provision for a Sanhedrin, something which they tried to do here at the beginning of the State of Israel, and the Brisker Rav and others were very, very against, because, don't get carried away with yourselves here. Let history unfold a little bit more until you start with a Sanhedrin. And what do you think about it? Once we have a Sanhedrin, we're going Milchamas Rishus, and it is a bit of a scary idea. But Milchamas Mitzvah doesn't need any of that. So Kiseitze LaMilchama says we're going back to, in other words, so here the Torah is talking about Kiseitze LaMilchama, and whenever it says Kiseitze LaMilchama, it means Milchamas Harishus. Or Chaim says it, and the Rabbeinu Bachaya says it. Whenever it says Kiseitze LaMilchama in the Torah, it means Milchamas Rishus. When it says, so that's the Parshas Kiseitze and the Parshas Shoftim. The Rak, the Hachrim Tachrimim, is talking about one of the 3 cases of Milchamas Mitzvah. Am I clear? So, says the Rambam further. Now we understand the psukim. Says the Rambam, okay, now let's talk about what's practical, which is the Milchamas Mitzvah that we can do nowadays. Says the Rambam, Mitzvah saseh lahachrim shiva amamim shnemar hachrim tachrimim. V'chol shel ba liyadai, very strong. V'chol shel ba liyadai echad mehen. Not talking about Amalek here, we're talking about some Kanani, Achiti, or an Amorite. Kol sheba liyadai achad mehen, v'loi haragai, hareza oiver b'loi saseh. Shenamar loi sechaya kol neshama. So even individual. Loi sechaya kol neshama. The Torah says he's evil, and you have to eradicate it. Comes the Rambam says, ukvar avdu ve'avad zichram. But we don't know who they are. The Radvaz says, so we know that the time of Sancherev, that was the time of Chizkiyahu HaMelech, yeah? So in the time of Sancheiriv, so one of the the leadership ideas of Sancheiriv was a very, very powerful leader. So one of his ideas was to create assimilation amongst all the nations of the world. There should no longer be Hittis and Amoris and Chinese, and let's just mix everybody up and move everybody to different places, and there'll be peace in the world. Like sort of a Migdal Bavel type of an idea. That was his idea. But once he did that, so we have no clear way of identifying who is from the Zion Amim and who is not. So it's very interesting that the Rambam brings us, just a ha'ara, that the Rambam brings this, and he says, Kfar avdu va'avad zichram. Now, it's very interesting because here the Rambam says we do a Milchemas mitzvah, Rambam's halacha l'maisa. We do the cherem of the Zion Amim, but we can't do it because basan cherev bilbilas ha'olam. So it means to say, I think the correct way to read this Rambam is that, of course, we would do it, but there's a technical difficulty. The technical difficulty is we don't know who they are. It's technisch. In other words, like be'etzem, that mitzvah is still there, it's still alive and well, and that's part of Milchemas mitzvah. Just, in fact, we don't know who they are and who they aren't. As the Rambam goes further, halacha hey, that's one case, Zion Amim. Shiva Amamim. V'chein, mitzvahs essay la'abed zera Amalek. Next case is Amalek. So, chen mitzvahs essay la'abed zera Amalek shenemar timcha ezecher Amalek. Mitzvahs essay, so la'abed. La'abed doesn't mean that you clap. La'abed means la'abed. La'abed means that you kill, if you destroy them, yeah. There's a story that is brought in the one of the Talmid of the Chassam Sofer. He said that the Chassam Sofer, when the Hafla was nifter, I think it was when the Hafla was nifter, his Rebbe, so he was Makabel Reb Nosson Adler as his Rebbe in Frankfurt, and he said his famous words, the Chassam Sofer, that just like you're not allowed to go Dalet Amos without tzitzis, you're not allowed to go Dalet Amos without a Rebbe. And you have to have, everybody in this world has to have a Rebbe, somebody outside of themselves that's giving them some guidance and some leadership. And he chose Reb Nosson Adler, if I have the history correct. He chose Reb Nosson Adler to be his guide. And he decided that to go to, he was in Pressburg, yeah? So to go to properly appoint somebody as your Rebbe, you have to go by foot. You have to make the journey. In other words, there was no telephone, no. You have to make the journey to the Rebbe. I don't know exactly how he went. He went from Pressburg to Frankfurt to tell Reb Nosson Adler that you're my Rebbe. That's to be makabel him as his Rebbe. And when he came into Reb Nosson Adler and introduced himself, I don't know if they knew each other, but to introduce himself, Chassam Sofer was already the Gadol Hador. I mean, Chassam Sofer was very big. So Reb Nosson Adler said, "You have a beautiful shine on your face. It looks to me like you just did some kind of a big mitzvah." So Chassam Sofer gave even a bigger smile. He says, "Yeah, I did." "What'd you do?" He says, "On the way here, I met a guy from Amalek and I killed him." So that's okay. I'm saying that's what it says in the Svar. So they made a l'chaim together, and just a story. We just learned in the Rambam that he said that the Zion Amam also is for Yachid. So time of Milchama. So Amalek, you don't need to have a war. For Amalek, that's what you're saying. Amalek, you don't have to have a war. V'chein mitzvah esay la'abed zera Amalek timcha zecher Amalek. A mitzvah esay lizkar tamid nachadin. You have to always zachar es asher asa l'cha Amalek. You got to keep it in mind also. We don't have to keep in mind the Zion Amamim, the Shiva Amamim, but you do have to keep in mind timcha zecher Amalek. Lizkar tamid ma'asav haroyim va'arevasei kedei la'orer revasei, so that you should hate them even more. There's also something I was always uncomfortable with, but I'm not uncomfortable anymore. Like if they lose koach in this war, as an example, because we're living it. If you leave koach in this war, so stop and think for a minute what they just did. Mamzerim. Like it's not L'Oyer Zichram. Just think of how dangerous this is and how disgusting and how ruthless and how this is mamish the power of evil, Nazis. So sometimes you have to, I don't know why we're Rachmanim, B'nai Rachmanim, and that's how Hashem made us. Shnemar Zachar Hasher Asa L'cha Amalek. So that's the mitzvah, says the Rambam, of Zachar. Kedei L'Oyer. The mitzvah of Zachar has a time of a mitzvah. Oskar lishkoach evase v'sinase. We can't forget his eva and his sinat. Now, so we have three ways to do war. On the Rambam, on the Shiva Amamim, the Rambam says in Forish, this is not Nogei Lamais anymore, because Bas Hancher v'Bilbul Ha'amim, Ha'umais. There's already a Bilbul. Self-defense is self-defense. War 3. War 2, which is the war of Amalek, so the Mefarshim are ma'arer that the Rambam doesn't say the same thing. This halacha hey should have been halacha dalid, ukvar avdu va'avad zichram, because just like Sancheirav went and he was milvalbul the umos, so we don't know who the Shiva Amamim anymore, we also don't know who Amalek is. So if we don't know who Amalek is, why does the Rambam make it into a different halacha? He doesn't say this by halacha hey. So I tell you, I mentioned this a couple of times here already. So B'Shem Rav Chaim Brisker, he explains that from here we see that Amalek is different than the Shiva Amamim. B'Shem Rav Chaim Brisker, it's not written from Rav Chaim Brisker, but B'Shem Rav Chaim Brisker, the great Lamdan in the Rambam, who says that why does the Rambam shtel zechais like this? So it says Rav Chaim Brisker, because the 7 nations are different than Amalek. The 7 nations is an Indian of Geza. It's an Indian of who they are, what their mother was, what their father was, the Yichus. Mashen Kain, the Amalek, we can tell them by their midos. So since we could tell them, so B'Shem Rav Chaim Brisker, from this Rambam you can see that if it looks like Amalek and it smells like Amalek, it is Amalek. And now, this is interesting. Rav Chaim doesn't say it, and that's a pretty big say. Like it's a big zug that you could say today. So I know that I was just reading about it that Rav Beryl Soloveitchik, who was actually my Rosh Hashiva, but the Rosh Hashiva of Brisk, Olav Shalom. So he said that this is sheker that Reb Chaim said this, and not only sheker but asur la'amrei. Asur la'amrei, I understand. Like it's not politically a good idea to say that it's sheker. I mean, who am I? But that Reb Chaim never said it. It's hard. It's always hard to say about anybody that he didn't say it. I mean, I guess what he meant to say, if Reb Chaim would have said that, I would have heard about it. But how can you know conclusively that Reb Chaim didn't say something, even if you're his grandson? But I worked out that it's not a kasha, because I don't think this whole thing came from Reb Chaim. I think it's a misquote. And I found here in the Harei Kedem, this is the writing of Rav Soloveitchik, or Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik in America. It's actually a photocopy from this is his writing. So Rav Soloveitchik says, I just want to read you a little bit of this, and then I'm B'zeh Asayim. Before I even do that, I just want to make a ha'ara. Like, again, the question is it possible to identify Amalek after Sancheirav? That's the question on the table, right? I just want to ask a question before I even talk about Rav Soloveitchik, just Yaakov Haber. Does anybody have a question whether Haman was from Amalek? It was after Sancheirav.
It's in the Megillah. It tells us who he was.
Right, that's first Makra. Yeah. How are we so sure about Amalek? And not only that, the Gemara Megillah says we made wars against them because it was Timcha Zecher Amalek. And we're all clapping with our feet and our groggers because of Timcha Zecher Amalek. So it's Amalek. It was after Sancheirav. So how do you have Amalek after Sancheirav? Okay, so those guys you are allowed to kill. You mean Sancherev, so that's the teretz. Sancherev was not mevalbel mishpachas Haman. Right. So I saw in the Sholem Eshev. I just looked and I found that the Sholem Eshev asked the question: How do we know Haman is Amalek? So the Sholem Eshev, Yosef Shol Nathanson, a great poskim of Europe, he says that because he wasn't able to be mevalbel, like Nisan was saying, he wasn't able to be mevalbel the sarim of those nations. He was only able to be mevalbel the folk of the people. So Haman held on to the yichus. They had a tradition, and with I am from Mishpachas Ha'agagi, and I am from Esav and from Amalek, and we're very proud Amalekians, and hence they had the din of Amalek. This is what Sholem Eshev says. But stop haloi davar hu, you have to have a teretz, because otherwise, like this, it's not so pasha to always say. Let's put it this way. Basan cherev ubilbilas amim. That's not always the right answer. V'haraya Haman and v'haraya. There's other cases in Israel. Like I said, the Chassam Sofer go all the way. But so Rav Soloveitchik writes like this. Kedai for us, me too. I can send anybody a copy of this if you're interested, but I have one copy. Ha'ashkocha menasa oisanu shuvpam b'mashper ha'over al Eretz Yisrael. One more time. We are being tested by the tribulations that are passing over Israel. And I want to say something openly. Rav Soloveitchik said this in a speech. And now, to be Ladayik, this was, he used to give us a yahrzeit speech, and there's a book about it, Lezecher Abba Mari. Rav Moshe Soloveitchik was Rav Chaim Soloveitchik's son and the Briskerov's brother, yeah? So it was Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, that was his father. So he writes here, Eina davar nogeya la'asida politi shel haaretz bilvad. We're not talking about the political existence of Israel. Don't fool yourself and think that what the Arabs want is independence in their land. They don't want it to be open jail and all the other garbage that they say. What we're talking about in these wars is an existential threat to the Jewish people. Heim shoafim, the enemy is, their desire is lahashmid chalila as hayishuv meish ve'ad isha. That's what they want. Me'oilel v'ad yoinek, me'shor v'ad seh. Like we're their Amalek, lahavdil. Ba'achas ha'asifai shel ha'mizrachi, Rav Soloveitchik writes, in one of the meetings of Mizrachi, Amarti b'shem Abba Mori. So I just want to be miyashiv this. I said in the name of my father, not Reb Chaim, in the name of my father, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, Ki parshas milchama la'Hashem ba'amalek midor dor, eina mugbelas b'chaloisa atziburis ki milchemas mitzvah legeza mesuyim. It's not limited to a particular race. That's not the pshat. Elo koilelas choivos hiskoimamus neged kol umma. What we have to do is a milchemas mitzvah against any nation, o kvutza, hachadura shigoyin shelsina, which displays a crazy amount of hate. In other words, if someone gets up, if a nation gets up and says, annihilate the Jewish people, we don't want them in this world, that's Amalek. That's Amalek. Mashma, kisha chayrasa al digla, when their flag has the logo, the l'chuven achide migoy v'lo yizacher shem Yisrael oid, as the Tillim says, he hoifeches Amalek. It becomes immediately Amalek. Now, unclear to me whether he means that, now we have a siman that it's Amalek, or if he means that don't have to be Migeza Amalek. That's already what the Torah meant when it said Amalek. This seems to be in the Talmidim an argument what Rav Moshe Soloveitchik. So first of all, very possible that Rav Chaim Soloveitchik never said this. This is Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, and Rav Soloveitchik put the diuk, as he says here on the bottom, is the diuk. I'm not going to read it to you because I just told it to you. It's all the diuk in the Rambam. Like you see clearly in the Rambam that the Rambam doesn't say ukvar avdu va'avad zichram by Amalek. So we see this the standard pshat in Ba Sancheir v'Bilbel as ha'olam, according to the Rambam, says that this does not include Amalek. What does include Amalek? So Rav Soloveitchik says two things on the bottom. In the footnote here, he says two things. Number one is their goal is the total annihilation of the Jewish people. That's one siman of Amalek. Second siman of Amalek is ruthlessness. So if anybody who wasn't convinced 2 weeks ago could be convinced now. Totally ruthless as a policy, not just as a bunch of shkotzim, as a policy to go and to be and decapitate and be ruthless, and this will follow according to these words of Rav Soloveitchik, and that on this there's a mitzvah of zachar asher asa lecha Amalek. This is the zachar asher asa lecha Amalek. You have to keep in mind what you're doing over here. That you're not a power of you're eradicating evil from this world. They have to be eradicated, otherwise, God forbid. Look what happened when you let the Nazis go a little too far, or go at all. Yeah.
The actual mitzvah of Amalek in the
Kiseitza.
thank you. Doesn't focus on who they were, where they came from. Amalek, it focuses on what they did. So,
The big way to I'll conclude here, and I'm not even sure if I want to make this available online because, but the gvura over Amalek is v'haya ki yarim Moshe es yadav. When Moshe raised his hands, the Gavar Yisrael, and Chazal say that he raised his hands. You could learn it al pi Kabbalah, Chesed, and Gvura. Pashat Pshat, the Mishnah says, so when he raised his hands, everybody looked to Shemayim. What? Moshe Rabbeinu's hands made Milchama, they didn't make Milchama. The Gavar Yisrael is when we look to Shemayim and we keep in mind Shemayim. And I think I just want to be most of the Mishnah. It's such an interesting thing to me. Maybe I'm just optimistic, but I might be right. It's an interesting thing that the division and I'll share with you. My Yetzer Hara got me, and I was watching one of these videos of this hero who took out 10 Hamas guys in Kfar Aza himself with a shotgun. And he was explaining how he did it, and this guy, a Chiloni guy, so they got the wrong guy because he was part of the special forces of the Mishtarat Yisrael, and they just picked the right guy, even though he said that they were dafka coming for him, and took them all out and saved his family and saved the people around him. He's a hero, but so there was an interview on them on 60 Minutes, So in the interview, so that the interviewer said, no, this was not the 60 Minutes, I'm sorry, this was an Israeli interview. The interviewer said, like why, like you were saved, other people died. They said, it's very difficult. Mi odei lama ze mazal. And the wife says, Be'etzem ani lo ma'amina. Aval b'chol zot. So interesting, it struck me, like, ani lo ma'amina, aval b'chol zot. B'chol zot, and just have this regesh. I just want to share my regesh that we're living in a big b'chol zot. B'chol zot, people are, I don't mean just, there's no atheist in a foxhole, and there's a lot of foxholes around here. It's not just about the tzitzis and the tefillin and other things that we see or we can't love, but it's clear to me that the Jewish people have a nishmas Yisrael, and if we look klape Shmayim, Yirz Hashem will be matzliach and safe. Yirz Hashem.